Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last talk of InStudio today. We have Hugh Fraser. He's from Paragon Architects. He's the media manager, and he's got a very interesting topic today to talk about, which is Pokemon Go and why this might actually help us. So we can't wait to hear what he has to say. Thanks again to Cola, who sponsored today and made these talks possible. You can find out more about their products on stand K24 in Hall 5. Thanks, we hope you've enjoyed the show, and I'm going to hand you over to Hugh.
Thank you. Well, actually, it's so intimate, I think we should just have a team hug. We can all just sit on these 3 chairs. Bit creepy. The basis of this lecture is something that I presented at Bloemfontein University last week. And a lot of effort goes into these talks, so please don't feel as though I'm rehashing lectures. And also, it was originally aimed at architecture students, so some of it might seem a little bit out of depth, but the reality is that it's going to affect all of us, every single one of us. And it's probably because of the firm that I work in very large buildings and very often commercial buildings, but it's only a matter of time before it filters down onto the domestic market. I think we're deeply entrenched in the digital era already, so how do we start humanizing architecture in an uber digital world? Pokemon Go released in New Zealand, of all places, on the 6th of July. And in South Africa by the 26th of July, I think it was. I didn't actually myself even know what Pokemon Go was, but because I had an American account, one of the kids in the office showed me how to do it. So I very proudly announced to him that I killed my first Pokemon. He said, "You don't kill them, you capture them." Anyway, I've now captured 2. And one of them was under my car. That's a little creepy. Anyway, so the work that parametric architecture has been around for a while, and I don't know if anybody, in fact none of you will recognize this building because I didn't recognize it either. Not that I'm any brighter, but this in fact is the Watergate complex, famous for Watergate. And it was designed by a guy called Moretti in the late 1960s. This is Frank Gehry's building in Bilbao, which was designed ironically using software that was used to design aeroplanes. And that was the only software in the mid-90s that could design these sorts of buildings. But in 2003, I went to Sao Paulo, and I was exposed to an Uruguayan engineer. You see, there's hope for engineers, called Eladio Dieste, and he died in 2002. And he had been doing, I have to go back. This book was for architects, because it's fat and there are lots of pictures. And this book is for engineers, because it's thin and full of this kind of stuff. It took me, I have to tell you, it took me 8 years to find this book because I'd hidden it somewhere. Anyway, the reality is this guy had been designing buildings from the 1940s till he died in 2002 in Uruguay. And I went on a road trip with a friend of mine for 600 Ks, but Uruguay, to be fair, is only about the size of this hall, maybe not quite as big, but anyway. So he was designing these incredibly beautiful buildings. I mean, if you consider this is a shopping center, and if you think about shopping centers now, shopping centers are nothing more than billboards to hang marketing off. I mean, and this building is still around today. So I went to have a look at it. It's still around, and it's really, really beautiful, and it's completely mathematically designed. This was a church in the middle of Uruguay. The transept had burnt down, and if one considers that this is made entirely from brickwork, and that's what it looks like now. These are the photographs that I took. And this guy just had calculations. He didn't have fancy computers and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, it's incredibly elegant. What I thought was kind of hilarious is this church is about 40 kilometers from Montevideo, and there was a nun, and she was very pleased to see us, and she asked me where I came from, so I said that I came from South Africa. So she thought that was amazing, and the fact that I was white. So I said to her, "You don't seem to think it's weird that you're South American and you're white. So your white is different to my white?" Whatever. Anyway, these are more of the buildings that he had done. Again, all mathematically designed, not with computers. This is a bus station. So this friend of mine, we drove around all over having a look at this stuff. I'm not going to spend any time on this, but there is a computer software that the kids all use nowadays. And this is what they would have done to design the building had they done it now. But I'm not going to go into that. If any of you have been to London in the last couple of weeks, you would have seen the Serpentine Pavilion, which is erected every year in the middle of June, and it comes down in the middle of October, I think, June, July, August, September, October. It's up for 3 or 4 months. Anyway, some world-famous architect gets asked to design this pavilion every year. I think it's my turn next year. I'm not sure. It's either next year or the year after. I can't remember. So they're a bit like, this was the day before it opened, but because the British are so sort of polite, you can kind of walk up to the building, but you can't go into it. The sun was shining, but that was our allocation for the year. It is designed by a guy called Bjarke Ingels, a Danish architect, very pleased with himself. And then I went back 2 weeks later because I'd been to New York in the interim, and of course it was raining, of course. But it's just, what's interesting about it, it's an opportunity for world-famous architects to put up a structure that's not intended to be there for very long. So you can take liberties that you would not be able to take on a house or any other buildings. And what's kind of interesting about these buildings, in many ways, they're a gestation or a petri dish for how we think things are going to be in the future. And very close by is the work done by Zaha Hadid, the very famous Iraqi, oh, you're nice, architect. She died about 3 months ago. Students, if you hang around for long enough, you go anywhere and you taught them. And then again, I'm sure you know about the Tate Modern Gallery, and this is the new extension that was opened about 3-4 weeks ago by the very famous Swiss firm Herzog & de Meuron. Now, what's interesting about this building is every single one of these bricks would have been modeled in the software that we're using in architecture now. And the best part of it is any housewife or house husband can go home and download this stuff and design their own house and then phone an architect and say, just build it, just draw it. This is in New York. It was a sanitation building. But I just it's just a sanitation building that's dealing with utilitarian tasks. But I like the way that they had actually put a bit of effort into it, and the form making is quite beautiful. That's also out of sequence. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the work of Santiago Calatrava. He's a very famous Spanish-Swiss architect. He's an architect engineer, fascinated by the human body and animal bodies. And whilst his work is very inspiring, it tends to be rather formulaic. So this is on the basis of the World Trade Center, and that's what it looks like inside. Of course, you have to put the American flag there, because otherwise you'd never know that you were in America. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. And these kind of architectural elements, it's only a matter of time before they filter down through the kind of buildings that as regular people we occupy into our own houses, and the impact that technology is going to have. I mean, we already have talking fridges, so. This was the rest of the. Zaha Hadid in 2008 had designed one of the most famous parametric modeled buildings in the world. It was in Austria, because the nice thing about being Austrian is you can afford these types of buildings. And they built these 4 railway stations, one in the town, one on the edge, one halfway up, and one at the top. And so this building's been around. I visited this building, 8 years ago. And what's very interesting is when you visit it for the first time, your initial reaction is, what does this mean? What is the relevance? Do I like it? Don't I like it? And as time passes, you start to see how, whether you like it or you don't like it, it starts to have an impact on your life. Of course, when there's something new, you either want to be the first person or the best person. And she was definitely one of the first, and possibly one of the best. So are computers the answer? I just came back from Sweden, and this is the library of Gunnar Asplund. You did know that. I know you knew that, but your mouth was full. So this was a Swedish architect. He died in, I don't know, the 1960s. And again, obviously no computers, no mathematical. And it's a really, really beautiful building. I mean, obviously the Swedes don't have much to do with their money either, so they're big investors in architecture. And then the Sydney Opera House, which was built during the 1970s, but again, built without computers, but built with mathematical modeling. What I thought was kind of hilarious, the singer, maybe this audience is better, Jerry Maguire, you do know him. Okay, but you're of a certain age. So I lectured the students and I asked that question. I had to put this in because I knew that they wouldn't know who the hell Jerry Maguire was. So Jerry Maguire is this famous singer, very famous, very super wealthy. But he's only 5'5", but he's very wealthy, and he bought himself a Ferrari, but he's so short that he couldn't reach the pedals. So what's the point of a Ferrari if you can't reach the pedals? And it's the same with architecture. What's the purpose of computers if they're not making our lives better? I'm not going to spend any time on this because it's very technical, but these are the ranges of computers and computer softwares that are being used in architecture at the moment. And I doubt that I mean, even as somebody as brilliant and as skilled as I, know more than one of these, and it's probably Outlook. So this is the stuff that is going into designing our buildings, but is it making our lives better? There are also systems, buildings are becoming more technical. In fact, that they're putting radio frequency elements into windows and doors. They're monitoring how they get used. And to some extent, yes, that does make sense. I ran this course at Wits a couple of years ago. We've gone into 3D modeling as well. But Wits is a bit like a government department. They spent R1 million on the machine. They didn't know how to use it. They used it 3 times, and now it doesn't get used at all. So these are some of the buildings that the firm that I work for has done. You might well recognize this one. It's opposite the Gautrain station. But it was the advent of computers that allowed us, A, to start allowing us to design things that we couldn't do before, and also in ways that we could save money that we couldn't have done before. And it's got to the stage, these are the hand wash basins, which we're doing now in the Sasol building, and we generate these images that are so perfect at times that it's difficult to work out whether it's a render or an actual photograph. And in my job, I have people phoning us up, usually from advertising agencies, to say, can we use such and such building for a Mercedes shoot? And I say, yeah, but it hasn't been built yet. And they say, yeah, no, it has. I saw it online, which is the same as must be real because it's on TV. So we are generating these renders that are so hyper-realistic that people actually think they're real. And I mean, me, who works in them, sometimes get fooled myself. This is in the Alexander Forbes building, which had so much light that we had to design this pod. We had to monitor the movement of the sun to work out how to shade the people. But anybody now who commissions a house from an architect, there's 100% chance that that building will be drawn on Revit. And what's amazing about it is you can punch in your latitude, your longitude, days of the year, and it'll simulate all the activity. I'm not telling you anything new, am I? Simulate the sun at any day of the year, and you can design accordingly. So buildings are you're going to have elements where parts of buildings can move, i.e., I mean, we know that in winter the sun is much lower, in summer the sun is much higher. So how do you deal with that in a building? Do you have movable screens? Do you have things that slide? Do you move in the building? Do you change positions? And how we occupy our buildings becomes very relevant. I think some of you may have seen this building. Say again? That's us as well. This is all Paragon's work. No, we did a quarter of Santon. This is the Alice Lane building that we did, that was initially a renovation. And what's interesting is this building was built in about 2008, I think. And the last building will be will be finished in March of next year. So it's just over 8 years. And what's quite extraordinary is how the technology has changed in those 8 years, even for me, a Luddite. The one thing that computers have done to architecture is it means that we can move much faster. The bad thing about it is that our clients know that. So they're either asking you to change all the time, or they're asking you to give them 50 variations of the same thing, but not pay for them either. This is the flagship for Virgin, the gyms. In fact, I took students here while under construction. There were about 60 students from Wits, and we walked around the corner and we walked slap bang into Richard Branson. And I don't know who was more excited to see whom. He's such a showman. He was like, oh my God, I've got like 60 students to impress. And then there was them. It's like, oh my God, it's Richard Branson. It's like mutual backslapping association. So all of them, I'm not going to get involved in the technicality of this, but all of these buildings have been modeled on computers, both for a form and function, but also to respond to the climate. All of these windows have been measured for the amount of light that they allow in and the amount of heat that goes out. So it's this constant fight between light and heat. We did have one student working on these dots, but he worked on them for about 3 months, and then he never came back. It's an aluminium, it's a tree, it's an image. I mean, that's the other thing, the use of graphics that get translated onto buildings. And it's an aluminium frame, skin. But I think, so this is Alice Lane 3, which is currently under construction. And we clearly didn't learn our lesson the first time, because this is all glass to reduce the amount of electricity that gets used to generate lighting. But it allowed in too much heat. So we put these, what's called the frit, these dots onto the glass. But we found out later that when the pattern was very regular, it was very disorientating to the human eye. So we had to change the pattern from quite big in the middle to quite small at the edge. And we had to do it by hand. And we had these 3 architects in the office. Oh, babes, don't go. I bored them. So they threatened to resign. And we had to pay 300,000 rand to some company to generate an algorithm. So we clearly didn't learn. But what is interesting about this development is once it's finished, the spaces between them are going to be much more kind of user-friendly. They're not going to be necessarily public space, but at least they're going to be better than Sandton City. Designed on a Canadian model because our weather is so similar. Not. Yeah, so all these spaces, where's Sandton? So Sandton City is here, and all of these spaces are going to be kind of public spaces. That's what it looks like now. The Sasol headquarters, which will be finished next month, in fact, they're moving 14 buildings from Rosebank into one. 7,500 staff members are moving in. And everything that we learned before is being included into this building. So all the planting is going to be indigenous. They started growing it about a year ago. And Sasol's extensive koi collection has to be included as well. And what I love about corporates, they're not providing any smoking facilities because they needed to get their Green Star rating. So if you want to smoke, you're going to have to walk to the bottom of the garden. And if we learned anything from Alexander Forbes, 1/3 of their 700 staff members smoke. So we fully expect 1/3 of the 2,500 people that work here to smoke. So you can expect to see white madams toying quite soon after they move in. There's no fire pit, sorry. The quantity surveyor got hold of that. But the whole building has been modeled on sunshine. And where the building casts a reflection on itself, there's more glass. And where there's more sun, there's more shaded panel. Um, At one stage, we were going to have this moire pattern on the glass because it's double glazed. If you printed it on both surfaces, and as you walk past, the pattern would change. But I think once again, the quantity surveyor got hold of that, so we lost out on that. But again, all of the lessons that we're learning on these buildings are ultimately going to filter down into houses, community centers, and more community-type buildings. That's what Sasol looks like now. They've actually got the Ghostbuster team to start cleaning the windows and start taking the plastic off the building. Because our buildings are so technological, there's one person in our office who only works on clash detection. So clashes between electricity and water, or structure, or technology, or communications, and that's all they do. And it's only a matter of time before our houses are like that. I mean, as you can imagine with Wi-Fi and the talking fridge, that's going to happen as well. A lot of the work that we do is interior work as well. This is what we proposed for Sasol, the various forms of carbon, from coal up to solar. So, in this age of Pokemon, this came on social media last week. It's in German.
Am Smartphone. So viele Leute laufen hier die ganze Zeit hin und her, gucken die ganze Zeit aufs Handy, das ist so lustig. Guck mal, der Typ sogar mit einem Pokéball. Guck mal, über die mit Pokéball. Der ist so in seiner Welt. Ey, die gucken gar nicht mehr nach vorne, ne? Guck mal, der Typ auch, guck mal, ey. Oh mein Gott, der ist ins Wasser. Der ist ins Wasser. Der ist nicht ins Wasser gefallen.
Wait, there's more.
Sterb mal, Mann. Was ist passiert, ey? Hey, da ist ein anderer reingefallen.
Somebody else has fallen into the water as well. So it's only a matter of time before people start dying because of Pokemon. So what I want to say is, computers are great, but if you can't reach the pedals, what are they doing to us? Ultimately, as humans, on the one way, of course, we love Wi-Fi and what we can do on our phones, but we still love the market. We still love the kind of hands-on things. I took these in New York about 2 weeks ago. We still want to be able to cook food. I don't want an app. I don't need an app to tell me about, well, maybe, but I still want to be able to cook. I found out, somebody told me there was something called the Mermaid Parade. It was held on Coney Island. And they said you catch the whatever train. And I got on the train, and I wasn't sure if I was on the right train. Anyway, I got on the train, and I saw these people, and I realized I was definitely on the right train. So they go out to Coney Island, and there are, I don't know, 30, 40,000 people just hanging out and doing shit. It's not for anything. It's not celebrating anything. It's just an opportunity to dress up. So it's really, really important that we maintain the human skills, because otherwise, life is just going to be a drag. It's important that you look left, you look right, but mostly look both ways. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a very valid point. Because Santon was designed for a couple of farms and then a few, it's not something that as architects we necessarily, it's part of our job, but ultimately the city planners, it's a problem. I will concede. It's not only the services. By the time as architects we get involved, we're quite far down the food chain. But traffic, traffic, I do know that they're making big inroads on traffic. But services, it's a problem. Look, I work for a very large firm, and the reality